is a very special woman. We don't know her name. We can only speculate the possibility of her name. But her story is certainly one in which many women may be able to identify. So this morning, we present to you Noah's wife.
That's it. Just Noah's wife, the no-name person, Mrs. Noah. My sons have names, Shaman, Japheth, and Ham. And my grandsons have names, Gomer, Cush, Caleb, Elam, all 16 of them. But me, I don't have a name. I'm just Noah's wife. Well, that's why I'm here, because I'm going to set this record straight. See, everybody's got me pegged as mean and a henpecker, something fierce. Especially hilarious was the time when I refused to get on the ark. But let me tell you, that wasn't a bit funny. There's a few things you don't know about all that. Why do you think Noah wanted me on the ark so badly? Because he loved me? No, that's funny. That man never loved me, ever. He only wanted me on the ark because I was the one who was going to look after them animals. I was the one who was going to clean their poops, feed their mouths, tend their litters, and nurse their sick. What do you think Noah was doing? Oh, no. He was going to be too busy navigating. Noah was going to stand there like he always does, giving orders and telling us they came from God. So, I suppose that means I was going to look after the animals and him too. And my sons, well, they each had a life. Was I supposed to look after them as well as Noah and the animals? And just you think about keeping that thing clean. It's 300 cubits by 50 cubits by 30 cubits. That's as long as the Tigris and Euphrates River and as high as Mount Sinai. With only one window, oh my God! See, he figured me to be the game warden, the housekeeper, and the cook. And we're not talking about just a week, we're talking about close to 2 months. And all the while, I'm in a state of constant pregnancy. No thanks. And that's just what I would have got. No thanks, no pay, and no credit. To read the Bible, you'd think Noah begat all you himself. And you'd think he begat only sons. Well, that ain't so. You know, if the flood destroyed all the world and all its people, where do you think you'd all come from? Me. And I'm not even given a name. And if that's not enough, when it was all over, God made a covenant with all the men. Oh, I knew he would. Of course, he includes me, I suppose, if women come in under the fowls, the cattle, and every beast on earth. Oh well, that's my life.
Honey, if my body were a car, this would be the time I'd be thinking about trading it in. I've got bumps and dents and scratches in my finish, and my paint job is getting just a little bit dull. But that's not the worst of it. My headlights are out of focus, and it's especially hard to see things up close. And plus, my traction's not as graceful as it once was. I slip and slide and skid and bump into things, even in the best of weather. My white walls are stained with varicose veins, and it takes me hours to reach my maximum speed, and my fuel rate burns inefficiently. But here's the worst of it. Almost every time I sneeze, cough, or laugh, either my radiator leaks or my exhaust backfires. That makes me qualify. Cash for clunkers. What about you? Oh, and by the way, have you ever needed to call the police?
Yes, George Phillips of Meridian, Mississippi, was going to bed when his wife told him he left the light on in the garden shed. She could see it from the bedroom window. So George opened the back door to go turn off the light, but what he saw were burglars in the shed, stealing things. He went in the house, called the police, and they said, "Sir, is someone in your house?" House? No. Then they said all patrols were busy, that he should simply lock his door and others would be along. when available. Really, George said. Okay. He hung up. He counted to 30 and phoned the police again. Hello. I just called you a few seconds ago because there were people in my shed. You don't have to worry about them anymore, because now I've shot them all. Then he hung up. Within 5 minutes, 3 police cars, an armed response unit, and an ambulance showed up at the Phillips residence. They thought the bird was all right, but one of the policemen turned to George and said, "Sir, I thought you said you shot them." And George replied, "And I thought you said nobody was available." Have you had your yearly doctor visit? Let's check it on Jack.
And now, another episode of America's favorite senior soap opera, All My Gallstones.
Hello, I'm Dr. Enstein, Dr. Frank Enstein. So tell me, what seems to be the problem?
Well, I thought you were going to tell me.
What I mean is, what's your complaint?
Oh, I have several of those. Let's see. The neighbor's dog. Reality TV shows. Metamucil. People who won't share their cough drops. Generally speaking, I just hate all that stuff.
Okay, I guess I'm not being clear. What brought you here?
Oh, my wife, she's out in the waiting room. Do you want me to go get her?
No, I mean not right now. Look, Mr.
Hammer.
Hammer. What's your first name, Mr. Hammer?
Jack.
Oh my, Jack Hammer. I used to work in,
Yeah, I used to work in construction.
what did you do?
I operated the jackhammer.
Of course you did, and you no longer do that.
No, I had to quit.
Why is that?
Well, at work, I just couldn't stop shaking.
Okay, Jack, this is Nurse Sally Manella. Nurse Manella, would you take Jack's temperature, please?
Oh, I'd rather she didn't. I'm just a little chilly as it is.
No, Jack, I'm not taking anything. I'm just going to check to see what your temperature is.
Oh, okay.
Now open your mouth.
Oh, there she goes. No, I'm not hungry.
I'm not feeding you, Jack. I'm just taking your temperature.
Again, always taking.
Checking, Jack. I'm going to check your temperature so Dr. Einstein can figure out what's wrong with you.
But there's nothing wrong with me.
What are you doing here then?
Oh, I just came to be with my wife. She's the one with the appointment.
I don't get it. If your wife had the appointment, why did you come into the exam room?
Exam room?
Oh my
I was looking for the restroom.
Tune in next time when Jack Hammer says,
Dr. Einstein, I think I have a tickle in my throat.
Well, how do you know that, Jack?
Well, I just want to keep I just wanted to laugh, but nothing's funny.
that's next time on America's favorite senior soap opera, All My
A minister decided that a visual demonstration would add emphasis to his Sunday sermon. 4 worms were placed in 4 separate jars. The first worm was put in a container of alcohol. The second worm was put in a container of cigarette smoke. The third worm was put in a container of chocolate syrup. The fourth worm was not
Once in a small mountain village, there lived two men who were good friends. The one man's name was Pedro. The other, no one remembered his name. You see, no one ever called him by name because they used his nickname.
Back when he was only 7 or 8 years old, everyone started calling him El Diablo, the devil, because he was so mischievous.
In school, if there was some prank being played on the teacher, you could bet El Diablo thought the whole thing up. He would get all the other boys involved, and they'd all get caught and get in trouble. So, most of the boys learned to stay away from El Diablo, but not his good friend Pedro.
All the way through grades and on up through high school, El Diablo kept dragging his friend Pedro into trouble. And even when they were grown men and should have known better, it was still happening. El Diablo was leading Pedro astray.
For example, there was the time that El Diablo said to his friend,
Pedro, have you noticed the apples on Old Man Martinez's tree? They look wonderful. Let's go steal some tonight. There's no moon. Nobody will see us.
Oh no. Old man Martinez has that big dog. He'll bite my leg off.
Oh no, he keeps that dog inside at night. Come on, let's go get some apples.
and he talked his friend into it. That night, the two friends got a big gunny sack and crept into Old Man Martinez's yard. They filled the sack with apples, then slipped back out onto the road.
We'll have to find some place to divide these apples up.
Of course, El Diablo, he had a great idea.
I know. We'll go down to the Campo Santo, to the graveyard. Nobody will bother us there.
So they went down the road until they came to the cemetery. They went in through the gate and walked along the low adobe, the wall that surrounded the graveyard, until they found a dark, shadowy place right next to the wall.
So they sat down and dumped out the apples and started to divide them into two piles. As they divided the apples, they whispered, one for Pedro, one for Diablo. One for Pedro, one for Diablo, making two piles of apples.
Now, it just so happened that a couple of men from the village had been out living it up that night, dancing and celebrating and drinking way too much. In fact, they all got so drunk that they couldn't even make it home. They fell asleep leaning against the wall, right over from where Pedro and El Diablo were dividing up the apples.
One man was a big, round, fat fellow. The other, he was old and thin, with a face that was dry and withered looking.
A few minutes later, the old man woke up. From the other side of the wall, over in the graveyard, he could hear a voice saying, one for Pedro, one for Diablo. One Pedro, one Diablo.
The poor man's eyes popped out like two hard-boiled eggs. Ay, de mio, St. Peter and the devil are dividing up the dead soul from the Capitano.
He woke his friend up, and the two men sat there staring, their mouths gaping, too frightened to speak. The voice went on, one for Pedro, one for Diablo. One Pedro, one Diablo.
Finally, Pedro and Diablo got to the bottom of the pile of apples. Then the two men heard El Diablo's voice say,
Well, Pedro, that's all of them.
But Pedro happened to notice two more apples right next to the wall. One was a nice, round, fat apple. The other wasn't so good. It was sort of withered up. They heard Pedro say,
Oh no, Diablo. There's still two more. Don't you see those two right next to the wall? The big fat one and the withered up one?
the hair stood up in the back of those men's necks. They thought they were the ones being talked about. They listened for what would be said next, and then they heard El Diablo say,
Well, Pedro, you take the fat one, I'll take the withered up one.
Oh no, Diablo. Neither one of them is any good. You take them both.
When the two men heard that, they thought the devil would be coming over the wall any minute to get them. They sobered up in a hurry, jumped to their feet, and ran as fast as they could. They slammed the doors and locked them tight.
So they say from that day on, those two men stayed home every night. They never touched another drop of whiskey for the rest of their lives.
Have you ever been dog tired? An older, tired-looking dog wandered into our yard. I could tell from his collar and well-fed belly that he had a home and was well taken care of. He calmly came over to me. I gave him a few pats on the head. He then followed me into my house, slowly walked down the hall, curled up in the corner, and fell asleep. An hour later, he went to the door, and I let him out. The next day, Doggy was back, greeted us in the yard, walked inside, and resumed his spot in the hall. Again, he slept for an hour. This continued on and off for several weeks. Being curious, I pinned a note on Doggy's collar. I would like to find out who the owner of this wonderful, sweet dog is and ask if you are aware that almost every afternoon your dog comes to our house for a nap. The next day, he arrived for his nap with a different note pinned to his collar. The note said, he lives in a home with 6 children, 2 under the age of 3. He's trying to catch up on his sleep. Can I come with him tomorrow? Have you ever been caught between fantasy and reality? Do we have a story for you? Sorry.
Once upon a sunny morning, a man who sat in the breakfast nook looked up from the table, from his scrambled eggs, only to see a unicorn, a pink unicorn with a silver horn, quietly cropping roses in the garden. The man went to the bedroom where his wife was asleep and he woke her.
There's a unicorn in the garden eating roses.
She opened one unfriendly eye, looked at him, and said,
The unicorn is a mythical beast.
she turned her back on him. The man walked slowly downstairs and out into the garden. The unicorn was still there. And he was now browsing the tulips. The man pulled up a rose and gave it to him.
Here, unicorn. Here, unicorn.
The unicorn ate it gravely. With a high heart, because there was a unicorn in his garden, the man went upstairs and roused his wife again.
That unicorn ate a rose.
The wife sat up in bed and looked at him coldly. She said,
You are a booby, and I'm going to have to put you in the booby house.
see, the man who never liked the word booby or booby hatch liked them even less on this shiny morning when there was a unicorn in the garden.
Oh, we'll just see about that.
He walked over to the door and stopped and told her.
He has a silver horn in the middle of his forehead.
Then he went to the garden to watch the unicorn. But the unicorn had gone away. The man sat down among the roses and went to sleep. As soon as the husband had gone out of the house, the wife got up as fast as she could. She telephoned the police, and she telephoned the psychiatrist, and she told him to hurry to her house and bring a straitjacket. When the policeman and the psychiatrist arrived, they stood and looked at her with interest, and the wife said,
My husband saw a unicorn this morning.
Policeman looked at the psychiatrist looked at the policeman. The wife said,
He told me it ate a rose.
well, the psychiatrist looked at the policeman looked at the psychiatrist.
He told me it had a silver horn in the middle of its forehead.
At a solemn signal from the psychiatrist, the policeman seized the wife. He had a tough time subduing her. But just as he got her into the straitjacket, the husband came back into the house.
Sir, did you tell your wife you saw a unicorn?
The husband said,
Of course not. The unicorn is a mythical beast.
That's all I wanted to know. Officer, take her away. Sir, I'm sorry, but your wife is as crazy as a jaybird.
oh. So they took her away, cursing and screaming, and shut her up in an institution. Her husband lived happily ever
And another thing, don't count your boobies before they're hatched.
You know, we all forget things on occasion, and sometimes we just have to laugh at ourselves. Well, let me tell you, there was 3 sisters living in a house, 92, 94, and 96, and they all lived together. One night, the 96-year-old drew a bath. She put one foot in, and then she paused. With a confused look on her face, she said, "Was I getting in or out of the bath?" The 94-year-old sister yelled back, "I don't know, I'll come up and see." She started up the stairs, she paused, and then she yelled, "Was I going up or down the stairs?" The 92-year-old sister was sitting in the kitchen table having tea and listening to her sisters. She chuckled as she shook her head and knocked on wood for good measure. She then yelled, "I'll come up and help you both, just as soon as I answer the door." Everyone's heard the story of the 3 little pigs, but have you heard the real story?
Now, everybody knows the story of the 3 little pigs, or at least they think they do. But I'll let you in on a little secret. Nobody's ever heard my side of the story. I am the wolf. Alexander T. Wolf. But you can call me Al.
No one knows just how this whole big bad wolf thing got started, but it's all wrong. Maybe it's because wolves eat cute animals like bunnies and sheep and pigs. That's just the way they are. If cheeseburgers were cute, folks would probably think people were big and bad too. But the whole big bad thing is all wrong. The real story is about a sneeze and a cup of sugar.
So, way back and once upon a time, our friend the wolf was making a birthday cake for his dear old granny. He had a terrible sneezing cold, and he ran out of sugar. So he walked down the street to ask his neighbor for a cup of sugar. Now this neighbor was a pig, and he wasn't too bright either. Now he had built his whole house out of straw. Can you believe it? Who in his right mind would build a house out of straw? So of course, the minute the wolf knocked on the door, it fell right in, and he didn't want to just walk into someone else's house, so he called,
Little pig, are you in?
no answer. He was just about to go home without his cup of sugar for his dear old granny's birthday cake. That's when he felt his nose start to itch. He felt a sneeze coming on.
Well, he
Huffed and he snuffed. And he sneezed a great sneeze. And do you know what? That whole darn straw house fell down. And right in the middle of the pile of straw was the first little pig, dead as a doornail. He had been home the whole time. It seemed like a shame to leave a perfectly good ham dinner lying there in the straw. So the wolf ate it up. Think of it as a big cheeseburger just lying there. He was feeling a little better, but he still didn't have his cup of sugar. So he went to the next neighbor's house.
Now, this neighbor was the first little pig's brother. He was a little smarter, but not too much. He had built his house of sticks. He rang the bell on the stick house. Nobody answered, so he called,
Mr. Pig,
can't come in. I'm shaving the hairs on my chinny chin chin.
He had grabbed the doorknob when he felt another sneeze coming on.
He huffed and he snuffed.
And he tried to cover his mouth, but he sneezed a great sneeze. And you're not gonna believe it, but this guy's house fell down just like his brother's. When the dust cleared, there was a second little pig, dead as a doornail. Wolf.
Wolf's honor.
Now you know food will spoil if you leave it out in the open, so the wolf did the only thing there was to do. He had dinner again. Think of it as a second helping. He was getting awfully full, but his cold was feeling a little better. But he still didn't have that cup of sugar for his dear old granny's birthday cake.
So the wolf went to the next house. This guy was the first and second little pig's brother. He must have been the brains of the family because he built his house of brick. So the wolf knocked on the brick house, no answer.
Mr. Pig! Mr. Pig, are you in?
And do you know what that rude little porker answered?
Get out of here, Wolf. Don't bother me again.
Talk about it polite. He probably had a whole sack of sugar and wouldn't give the wolf even one little cup for his dear, sweet old granny's birthday cake. What a pig. The wolf was just about to go home and maybe make a nice birthday card instead of a cake, but he felt his cold coming on.
He huffed and he snuffed and he sneezed once again.
Then the third little pig yelled,
And your granny can sit on a pin.
the wolf was usually a pretty calm fellow, but when he heard that someone talk that way about his dear, sweet old granny like that, he went a little crazy. So when the cops drove up, of course the wolf was trying to break down the pig door, and at the same time he was snuffing and puffing and sneezing and making a huge scene. Well, the rest of the story, as they say, it's history. But news reporters arrived because they heard about 2 pigs that this wolf had eaten for dinner. But what they found was a sick guy going around to get a cup of sugar. Well, they didn't think that sounded very exciting, so they decided to jazz up the story with all that puff and puff stuff and blow your house down stuff. And instead, they made him into this big, bad wolf. Now, that's it. That's the real story.
I was framed! Maybe you could lend me a cup of sugar. Goodbye, Wolf. Well, a man hated his wife's cat, and he decided to get rid of it. So he drove 20 blocks from home and dropped the cat there. Pleased with himself, he drove back to the house. He pulled in the driveway, he noticed the cat was sitting on the front doorstep. So the next day, he decides to drive the cat 40 blocks away. Same thing happened. Well, over the next few nights, he tried to get rid of the cat, even though he increased the number of blocks and the directions and the time, and the cat kept making it home before he did. So at last he decides to drive several miles away, turn right, then left, past the bridge, right again, another right, and so on, until he reached the spot that he thought was the perfect place, and he dropped the cat there. Hours later, the man called his wife and asked, "Is the cat there?" "Why, yes, why do you ask?" Frustrated, the man says, "Put the cat on the phone, I'm lost and I need directions." Have y'all ever struggled with a really tight situation? We have a
Let me tell you what happened to me. Our neighbor's son was getting married at an out-of-town Catholic church, and my husband and I were invited. Well, we immediately rushed out to the local department store, and I bought a nice pink linen dress with a jacket and all those cute dyed-to-match accessories. Well, the dress was just a little bit too tight, but I had a month before the June 30th wedding, and I just knew I could lose a few pounds. Well, June the 29th came, and of course, I hadn't lost a single pound. In fact, I had gained 2. But I figured a nice new girdle would cure anything. So, on our way out of the city, we stopped once again at that same store, and I ran in, and I told the clerk that I needed a size large panty girdle. The clerk found the box with the described girdle marked large, and asked if I would like to try it on. Oh no, a large will fit just right. I don't need to try it on.
Well, the next morning was one of those 90-degree days. So she waited to get dressed until about 45 minutes before it was time to go. She popped open the girdle box, only to find a new $49.95 satin paneled girdle in a size small. Since it was too late to find another one, and the dress wouldn't fit right without a girdle, a fight broke out in the hotel room between her and the girdle.
Let me ask you a question. Have you ever tried to shape 20 pounds of potatoes into a 5-pound sack? Well, finally, my husband, laughing like crazy, got a hold of each side and shook me down into that girdle. Once I was snug in the girdle, I put on all those pink accessories, which did not go very well with my purple face, but I was ready to go.
All the way to the church, her husband kept asking, "Are you all right? You know, you look kind of funny." And he would laugh. You know, men, they just don't appreciate what a woman goes through to look good.
Well, as we eased into the pew at the church, he asked if I could make it. Now, he was getting worried because I was really breathing funny. And I told him I would be fine. And since we're Southern Baptists, and one of our wedding ceremonies takes 30 minutes or less, I assumed that this ceremony wouldn't last very long. But seated in a pew with us were 2 little old ladies who very politely introduced themselves. One of them said, "Isn't this just lovely? They're having a high mass." Oh, yes, lovely, I said. Then you know what, I turned to my husband and I asked, "What's a high mass?" He shrugged his shoulders, he didn't know.
Unfortunately, she learned that a Catholic high mass would last 1 hour, 22 minutes, and 8½ seconds. The priest blessed everything except her girdle. Over on the left side of the church, the bride's mother was crying, and over on her side, everyone was crying. One of the little old ladies elbowed the other and went, "Oh, look, isn't that sweet? She's so touched."
Oh, they were right. I have never been so touched in my life. My ankles were swelling, my knees were blue, and my thighs had no feeling left. My husband was fanning me with my pink accessories, asking questions and trying to comfort me. As soon as the priest announced them married and the wedding party made their way back up the aisle to exit the church, I bolted into position as the 5th bridesmaid. My husband was right behind me, still asking me questions. "Are you okay? Can I help? Can you breathe? Please just get me out of here."
She hop danced to the car across the parking lot, and once there, he opened the doors against the car that was right next to theirs. Right there, before God, mankind, and the entire wedding party, she squeezed her bruised and battered body out of that girdle. Then, to her horror, just as she lifted her foot to pull the elastic torture chamber off her body, the dumb girdle took flight. It ricocheted off a poor little bird and landed under the car that was next to theirs.
Honey, my husband was laughing so hard he couldn't even bend over to try to retrieve it. And I was just too miserable to care. So we just drove away. But you know what, over the last years I've often wondered what the parishioners of that fast uptown church thought the next morning when they found an overly stretched $49.95, Hamel size small girl in their parking lot.
That was very nice. We appreciate it. Thank you for coming. We hope it made you laugh a little bit.
That was great.
We are in the theater, we at the library on Fridays.
Because it's a
And
child's
we'll
story.
be starting in the next group in January. So if you're interested, just let Dolores know and we'll be in touch with you at that time. I would like to introduce everybody. At the end, we have Brenda. Angela, Paulette,